Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is and what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. We're here for the parts of Panem that happen after the cameras turn away, the systems behind the games, the contracts hidden inside victory, the lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the Capitol relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. Prim's ducktail shirt is too big. You remember that, right? The hem hanging uneven, the back of it sticking out as she walks to the reaping stage. One slip of paper, her name, Katniss's scream cutting through the square. I volunteer. It's the moment the whole district, the whole franchise, decides she's the definition of selfless. But here's the real question. What if that moment wasn't pure selflessness at all? At face value, it's simple. Older sister throws herself into the Hunger Games to save the younger one. The Capitol turns it into instant propaganda. District 12 gets a hero. The audience gets a clean moral story. Katniss is good, the system is evil, and sacrifice is the antidote. But if you slow that scene down in your head, you can feel something else under the surface. Panic, terror, a kind of animal refusal to stand there and do nothing. So what are we really watching? A noble sacrifice? Or a teenager whose brain has been wired by years of starvation and grief to avoid one specific outcome at any cost, losing Prim, the way she lost her father? In universe, the narrative is clear. She becomes the girl on fire, the symbol of hope, the promise that one person's courage can ignite a revolution. Fandom picks that up and runs with it. Any question about her motives feels almost disrespectful. How dare you call her selfish when she literally volunteers to die? But trauma psychology has a much colder way of framing this. When your world is shaped by the games, by mining explosions, by tesserae and empty cupboards, your choices shrink down to one thing: survive what you can, and avoid the kind of guilt that could destroy you. So when Katniss volunteers, when she insists on saving Peter in the arena, when she agrees to become the Mockingjay, we have to ask, is she acting out of moral nobility or out of self-preservation on an emotional level? Is she protecting other people or protecting herself from unbearable helplessness and loss? That part matters because it changes how you read almost every relationship she has. With Prim, with Gale, with Peter, is she giving herself away, or is she clinging to the few people who keep her from collapsing? Suzanne Collins has said Katniss isn't naturally political. She's not dreaming about overthrowing the Capitol. She's just trying to keep her tiny circle alive. So where does heroism end and psychological coping begin? This is where we talk about the definition of selfishness itself. What does selfish even mean when the system is literally designed to kill you and everyone you love? If refusing to watch your sister die is selfish, what isn't? And if your brain has been trained by the games to see every moment as a threat, can any decision be purely altruistic? In this breakdown, we're going to cover Katniss on a metaphorical therapist's couch. We'll pull in trauma psychology, attachment theory, and specific scenes from all 3 books and movies to test this selfish hero hypothesis. By the end, you might not see the reaping or the berries or the Mockingjay costume the same way again. Selfish, selfless, or just trying not to die. So before we put Katniss on trial for being selfish, we need to decide what that word even means. At face value, selfishness is simple. You put your own interests above everyone else's, even when it hurts them. You hoard food, you abandon people, you lie because it's easier. But here's the real question. Where does that end, and where does basic self-preservation begin? If your brain is convinced you're in danger 24/7, is grabbing the last loaf of bread cruelty, or biology doing its job? This is where we talk about trauma psychology and evolution instead of Tumblr morality charts. From an evolutionary perspective, behavior that keeps you alive long enough to have kids tends to get rewarded, even if it looks ugly from the outside. Hypervigilance, emotional numbness, pushing people away so you don't have to watch them die. Those can all be adaptive in a world that keeps proving it can't be trusted. There is a lot to uncover here, because the same action can be selfish in a peaceful suburb and completely rational in a war zone. Katniss doesn't grow up in a peaceful suburb. She grows up in District 12, where the mines collapse, coal dust coats your lungs, and the fence that's supposed to protect you mostly protects the capital's control. Starvation isn't a metaphor, it's what kills people before the games ever get to them. You trade tesserae and accept extra reaping slips because you're already calculating which child is most expendable. In that environment, focusing on your own tiny circle, Prim, your mother, maybe Gale, isn't a moral failure. It's the only way to stay sane. So when Katniss volunteers, is that pure selflessness, or is she preserving the one relationship that gives her any reason to keep going? When she clings to Peter in the arena, is she saving him, or protecting the version of herself he reflects back at her? The reason this question matters is that it reframes the entire story. If her core drive is survival, not heroism, then the revolution doesn't start because a noble symbol rises. It starts because a traumatized teenager keeps trying to protect her own and accidentally becomes useful. That part matters because it changes how we read the love triangle too. Gale and Peter stop being a simple Team X versus Team Y romance debate and turn into survival strategies. The hunter who shares her rage and the baker who offers a different way to live with the guilt. Even her final arrow, killing coin instead of snow, can be read as self-preserving. She's eliminating the next person who will use her and refusing to be recycled into a new version of the games. So here's the open loop for the rest of this breakdown. If we re-watch the trilogy assuming Katniss is not a natural hero, but a reluctant, sometimes selfish survivor, do the reaping, the berries, and even the I volunteer scene start to look very different. In the next section, we're going to cover specific moments where that tension between selfish and self-preserving really cracks through the surface. From seam girl to symbol, why Katniss isn't a natural hero, what happens when a girl who just wants to keep her family fed gets turned into the face of a revolution. That's where the story of one seam hunter collides with the entire political psychology of Panem. Back in the woods, Katniss is simple on the surface. She's breaking the capital's laws, sure, but only to put food on the table. Her world is tiny. Prim, her mother, maybe Gale. She's emotionally closed off, hyper-focused on survival. And the biggest promise she can imagine is, no one in my house starves today. Then suddenly, that same girl is the Mockingjay, a global symbol of hope. At face value, that's a glow-up. In practice, it's a weaponization. Here's the real question. How do you get from that silent teenager with a bow to the icon whose every tear, kiss, and hesitation becomes propaganda? You don't change who she is, you change what her choices mean to everyone watching. So we start stacking the why questions. Why does she volunteer for Prim? Is it pure altruism, or is it that she literally cannot live with the guilt of watching her sister die when she could have stepped in? Why does she play up the star-crossed lovers with Peter, even when she's unsure of her own feelings? Because the games force her into a relationship performance where survival, ratings, and public sympathy are all fused. That part matters because it shows how quickly her private instincts get converted into public narrative. Then, after she survives, why does she resist leadership so hard in District 13? Why won't she give Coin the clean, obedient mockingjay the rebellion keeps asking for? On paper, it reads as stubborn or selfish, but from a trauma lens, it's a teenager refusing to let yet another authority turn her into a tool. Her selfish limits are exactly what make her dangerous to every regime, capital or rebel. She only truly fights for a narrow circle, and any government that tries to widen that circle on command runs into a problem. That's why the final why is so explosive. Why does she kill Coin instead of Snow? In that moment, Katniss isn't thinking in grand political theory. She's recognizing a personal pattern, another adult willing to sacrifice children for power. It's a deeply individual, almost instinctive decision, and yet it rewrites the entire future of Panem. There is a lot to uncover here, because the capital and later District 13 both need Katniss to read as purely selfless. A flawless hero is easy to sell in proper. A messy, grieving, sometimes selfish girl from the scene? Much harder to control, much easier to miscalculate. So to really answer whether Katniss is selfish, we can't start with the Mockingjay pin or the arena cameras. This is where we talk about the version of her no one in the capital ever sees. To understand the symbol, we have to go back to the coal dust, the hunger, and the father-shaped hole in a little house in the seam. Inside Katniss's head, trauma, attachment, and the seam. So we go back to that house in the seam, because that's where Katniss's brain gets wired. Before the mines blow her world apart, her life actually has structure. A father who sings in the woods, who teaches her to hunt, who makes the forest feel less like a threat and more like a promise. Food is scarce, but the relationship is secure. Then he dies, and everything flips. Her mother doesn't just grieve, she emotionally disappears. Katniss is 11, and overnight she becomes the adult in the room. She's the one trading at the hob, calculating rations, deciding who eats what. At face value, that looks responsible. But here's the real question. What does it do to a kid when if I mess up, my sister starves becomes the default setting in their nervous system? In trauma psychology, that's called parentification. The child steps into the caregiver role long before they're ready. We're going to cover this in more detail later, but the short version is, it tends to produce avoidant or anxious avoidant attachment. You grow up hyper-responsible, but emotionally walled off. You don't trust other people to show up. Dependence feels dangerous, because the one time you really needed a parent, she checked out. You see that all over Katniss. She doesn't ask for help. She calculates. She doesn't say, I'm scared. She says, I'll go. That part matters because attachment style isn't just about romance. It's about how you move through every relationship in the district, in the games, in the rebellion. If love has always come bundled with loss and abandonment, why would you open that door wider than you absolutely have to? So she builds a tiny circle. Prim at the center, Gale as the hunting partner who shares the burden and the anger, a mother she resents, but also protects out of duty. Notice who is not in that circle. Basically, the rest of District 12. She trades with them, she observes them, but she doesn't lie awake worrying about their kids. Unless the capital forces her hand, the district as a whole is background noise. And then there's the routine. Every morning, into the woods, through the fence, bow in hand, constantly scanning for peacekeepers, for game, for anything she can turn into bread. That's hypervigilance. When your brain has been trained by hunger and grief, it narrows its focus to immediate survival and a microscopic group of safe people. There is a lot to uncover here, but the headline is simple. Her mind is playing the games years before she ever steps into an arena. So when she volunteers for Prim, is that pure altruism? Or is it a trauma-conditioned reflex from someone whose entire identity is, I keep my sister alive or I am nothing? If your internal rule since age 11 has been that any slip-up means Prim dies, how selfish is it really when you prioritize her over every other child in Panem? In the next section, we'll test that question against Katniss's most controversial choices and see whether the selfish label actually holds up. Survival mode versus morality mode. How trauma rewires choices so. When you watch Katniss sprint for Prim at the reaping, your brain jumps straight to one word: sacrifice. But here's the real question. Is that scene about morality, or about a nervous system that's been stuck in survival mode for years, finally doing the one thing it's wired to do? This is where we talk about survival mode in psychology. When your body believes you're in danger all the time, your nervous system gets trapped in fight, flight, or freeze. Long-term ethics, abstract causes, even your own future, they get downgraded. The only thing that matters is, are the people in my tiny circle safe in the next 5 minutes? That part matters because from the capital's perspective, the games are about spectacle, but from Katniss's perspective, the games are just another predator in the woods. Growing up in District 12, Katniss doesn't just experience a few bad years. She grows up in chronic scarcity. Food is uncertain, safety is uncertain, reliable adults are optional. Her father dies, her mother emotionally checks out, and at 11 she becomes the functional head of household. Back then, her brain learns a brutal equation. If I don't bring something home today, Prim suffers today. So why would her mind waste energy on big picture moral calculus when the immediate cost is her sister's empty stomach? At face value, her daily hunting and black market trading look rebellious. She's breaking district law, crossing the fence, selling game to the peacekeepers. But look closer. She isn't doing it to make a statement about the capital or to challenge the games system. She's doing it because the moral weight of law means nothing next to the image of Prim crying over an empty pot. The relationship between rule and consequence has been rewired. Legal equals irrelevant. Survival equals sacred. We're going to cover a lot of Katniss's selfish choices later, but this is the template. She will risk everything for her tiny circle. Prim, a half-present mother, maybe Gale. Strangers, abstract ideals, the greater good of all 12 districts, those only start to register when they intersect with that circle, or when the games force her into a public role she never asked for. Suzanne Collins has said Katniss isn't naturally political, and this is the psychological reason why. Her system is calibrated to concrete short-term gains, not ideological promises of future hope. So when the reaping happens and Katniss screams Prim's name, what's really firing there? Is it a noble moral decision to lay down her life for another? Or is it the same survival logic she's always used, simply extended to the one person she literally cannot live without? And if that's true, what does it do to our idea of her as a hero once the games start turning that instinct outward? Reaping Day reframed, volunteering for Prim under the microscope. To answer that, we have to go back to the square. You've seen the scene 100 times, but pause it in your head and run it in slow motion. Prim's name is called. Katniss doesn't move. No heroic swell of music in her brain. No immediate sprint. She freezes. That part matters because a freeze is a trauma response, not a speech from a propaganda poster moment. Her body is doing threat assessment before her morals ever get a word in. Then the delay snaps. The scream tears out of her, raw and almost animal, and only after that do we get the lunge. It's messy. She stumbles, she shoves through people. She's not calculating odds or crafting a narrative for the district. At face value, it reads as pure self-sacrifice. But here's the real question. What if that instinct is wired less to, I will nobly die, and more to, I cannot let this happen or I won't survive it? This is where we talk about survivor's guilt. Katniss's father dies in the mine explosion. The Capitol doesn't just take a parent, it takes the family's food, their safety, their sense of any future. Her mother shuts down. Katniss is 13, and suddenly the only functional adult in that house. In her nervous system, a rule gets carved in stone. If she fails, her family starves. If she looks away, they die. So when Prim's name is pulled, it's not a new crisis. It's the same nightmare replaying with higher stakes. Letting Prim walk to the stage wouldn't just be sending her sister to the games. It would be repeating the original failure she already blames herself for. Not being able to stop her world from collapsing once. There is a lot to uncover here, because the reaping is tapping into years of rehearsed guilt. So volunteering becomes this twisted psychological equation. On the surface, I value Prim's life above my own. Underneath, if I let her go, I will not be able to live with myself. That distinction is huge. One is purely altruistic. The other is still protective. But now she's protecting both Prim and her own psyche from a guilt she knows would annihilate her. Does that make it less brave? Not really. Courage doesn't require clean motives. It just complicates the morality. She's not a capital poster hero. She's a traumatized teenager whose attachment system has narrowed down to a few people. Prim, her mother, Gale, later Peter. Threaten one of those, and you're threatening her entire reason to keep playing the games of survival at all. Pattern interrupt for you. Imagine an alternate universe where she doesn't volunteer. Could that Katniss actually keep existing as herself? Or would she dissociate, shut down, maybe never hunt again because every arrow would feel like proof she chose wrong? In that world, she might still be alive in District 12, but is there any hope left in her? So when she steps forward, we're seeing a survival move and a sacrificial move fused together. And once you accept that, you have to ask, when the arena demands she extend that instinct to strangers and symbols, what happens to a psyche built for protecting only a tiny circle? The narrow circle, who Katniss actually cares about. So when she steps forward for Prim, we're watching that tiny circle go to war with the entire world. This is where we talk about who actually lives inside that circle. At face value, Katniss is the girl who volunteers, who feeds starving families, who becomes a symbol of hope for an entire district. But if you track her inner monologue, her emotional map is brutally small. Prim sits at the center, then Gale, then her mother, but in this duty-based, I can't let you fall apart again way. Later, Peter gets pulled in. That's basically it. There are dozens of other Seam kids, other hungry families. And yet before the games, she almost never thinks, how do I save all of District 12? The question is always, how do I keep my few people alive? You see it in the hunting scenes. She and Gale talk strategy, trade, survival. Not revolution, not policy. Suzanne Collins has literally said Katniss is not naturally political. And that part matters because it explains why she doesn't start out dreaming about overthrowing the Capitol. She wants food on the table, Prim out of the reaping bowl, her mother functional enough not to collapse. That's the entire promise she's chasing. Once she's in the arena, that narrow circle hardens. The other tributes aren't children, they're moving threats. She doesn't wonder about their families, she wonders about their weapons. Rue is the one exception, and even that exception proves the rule. Rue reminds her of Prim. Same small body, same big eyes, same quiet competence. Katniss doesn't suddenly care about all the districts. She temporarily expands her circle by smuggling Prim into it under a different name. Here's the real question. When she's crying over Rue, is she mourning Rue, or the idea of Prim dying in a tree somewhere she can't reach? It's both, obviously. But notice how her grief instantly converts into a message to the capital and the districts. The flowers, the salute. She humanizes Rue because she's already human in Katniss's private world. The careers never get that upgrade. From the outside, that selectiveness can look selfish. She's not staying up at night worrying about anonymous kids in District 4. She's not planning a better future for strangers. But there is a lot to uncover here. In a system built on constant threat, trauma literally narrows your field of care. If you're scanning for danger every second, you can't emotionally afford to adopt the entire nation. Caring widely becomes its own kind of exposure. So is Katniss uncaring, or is she a textbook trauma survivor whose selfishness is just a survival algorithm? That's the tension the story keeps poking. And it sets up a brutal collision course, because we're going to cover what happens next, when Snow, Coin, and an entire rebellion start insisting that the girl who only ever wanted to protect 4 people now owes a relationship to every district, every martyr, every dead tribute. What breaks first, Panem or her? Enter the arena. Performance, self-protection, and Peter. So when Katniss actually enters the arena, what does that small circle only promise turn into in practice? You might expect a noble quest. It's not. Her plan is brutally modest. Don't die immediately. Don't suffer more than necessary. Maybe send a few sponsor gifts home to District 12 if she can. That part matters because it tells you her expectation isn't victory. It's delay. She's watched the games her whole life. She knows the odds for a coal miner's daughter. Back then, becoming a victor from 12 is a myth, not a plan. So, she focuses on what she can control, find water, avoid the careers, keep her body functional. Even the idea of helping her family is framed through survival math. If she dies, at least her death might buy them some food or medicine. And then there's Peter. This is where we talk about debt and danger sitting in the same chair. She remembers the bread. She knows in a very literal way that he kept her and Prim from starving. At face value, that sounds like the perfect setup for a star-crossed relationship. But here's the real question. What does a traumatized, hypervigilant teenager do with a person she owes her life to when only one of them is supposed to come home? Katniss's early stance toward Peter is almost clinically split. On one level, she feels indebted and confused by his kindness on the train and during training. On another, She sees him as a liability in the arena, someone who can get her killed. She even tells herself, in the text, that if it comes down to it, she'll let him die. Not murder him in cold blood, but not save him either if saving him means lowering her own odds. That's not cartoon villain selfishness. It's survival triage. The rule change is the first real pattern interrupt. Suddenly, Claudius Templesmith announces that two tributes from the same district can win. The games quietly flip from you or him to you and him if you sell it right. Her decision to find Peter is framed as a romantic rush. The audience swoons, but she's also doing the math in real time. 2 victors from 12 will be unprecedented, a propaganda goldmine, and a sponsor magnet. So she leans in, the cave, the kisses, the whispered promises. She is deeply uncomfortable with the performance, and Collins makes sure you feel that. But she does it anyway, weaponizing the audience's hunger for a love story, and by extension, weaponizing Peter's very real feelings. There is a lot to uncover here, because she's both protecting him and using him, both giving him hope and manipulating that hope to keep them alive. And then we hit the berries. When she lifts that nightlock, are we watching the ultimate selfless act? Choosing death rather than a world without Peter, or the ultimate selfish refusal to let the capital dictate her ending, even if it means mutual destruction? Or is it something even sharper, a move that turns their relationship into a loaded gun pointed at Snow's entire system? Hold that question, because the answer changes everything about what kind of hero she really is. The berries: love, pride, or weaponized selfishness. So let's freeze the arena on that last image. 2 tributes, 1 handful of nightlock, and a stadium full of people holding their breath. On the surface, it's a romantic tableau, star-crossed lovers choosing death over separation. But here's the real question. What is Katniss actually doing in those few seconds when everything in her life collapses into a fistful of poisonous berries? We need to rewind the tape. The rule reversal has already reshaped the games once. 2 victors from the same district, a tiny promise of hope dangled in front of Panem. Katniss has built her entire endgame strategy around that rule. Protect Peter, play up the relationship, survive together. Then Claudius Templesmith's voice cuts back in. Rule change revoked. Only 1 victor allowed. The capital wants its clean narrative back. Love or death, but not both. Watch what happens to Katniss's face in that moment, in the book and the film. There is shock, yes, but then something sharper. Calculation. She doesn't debate for long. No whispered plan. No pros and cons list. She pivots. Trust me, she tells Peter. And suddenly the berries aren't food. They're a weapon. Against Snow, against the games, and maybe against the version of herself who would walk out of that arena alone. So why does she do it? One obvious reason is Peter himself. She has already decided she can't kill him. The thought of being the lone victor, haunted by the boy who once threw her bread, is intolerable. At face value, the berries are the ultimate selfless act. I would rather die with you than live without you. But that part matters because it doubles as an escape hatch from a different nightmare, living as the capital's carefully packaged murderer of the boy who loved her. This is where we talk about reactive control. Trauma survivors who've been powerless for years often overcorrect when cornered. If every adult in your world has failed you, if your father died, your mother shut down, and your district taught you that the games are a rigged sentence, then submission feels more dangerous than self-destruction. Katniss would rather choose her own ending, even if it kills her, then let Snow write it for her. So is that selfless or selfish? Is she dying for Peter or refusing to live with herself if she doesn't? You can read the berries as a refusal to bear guilt, a refusal to be the Capitol's lone victim mascot, or a refusal to go back to District 12 as a symbol of their power. All three are true, and they pull in different moral directions, which is why this moment doesn't fit neatly into heroic sacrifice or spoiled rebellion. Pattern interrupt. Notice who misreads it on purpose. The Capitol spins the nightlock as proof of epic devotion because a love story is safer than a control story. We're going to cover how that misreading becomes propaganda, but psychologically, the berries are something colder, a high-risk, high-control move from someone who cannot tolerate powerlessness anymore. Katniss isn't just saying, "I love you," she's saying, "You don't own my ending," and that message is about to cost Panem far more than one rigged games. The girl on fire versus the girl who wants to go home. You don't own my ending. That's the moment the Capitol loses control of the games. But here's the real question. If Katniss just told the Capitol they don't own her, why does everyone else immediately act like they do? This is where we talk about the split between Katniss the person and Katniss the product. Cinna drapes her in fire, and suddenly she's the girl on fire, this dramatic, fearless figure who commands a room. Then Caesar Flickerman, and the cameras spin her into a star-crossed lover, a romantic heroine who would rather die than lose her boy from District 12. Later, Coin and Plutarch rebrand her again as the Mockingjay, a revolutionary mascot who supposedly believes in the cause with her whole heart. Each version is clean, simple, marketable. Katniss is none of those things in a clean, simple way. At face value, the titles look flattering. Who wouldn't want to be the symbol of hope for an entire country? But that part matters because every new costume peels away a real piece of her. The girl on fire erases her actual social awkwardness and discomfort with attention. The star-crossed lover flattens her confusion about her relationship with Peter into a neat love story. The Mockingjay pretends she's political, when even Suzanne Collins has said she's not naturally ideological at all. She's focused on survival and her tiny circle. So how does Katniss react internally to being turned into a one-woman marketing campaign? Badly. Consistently, she's annoyed when Haymitch tells her to sell the romance. She's confused and almost horrified when people in the Capitol cry over her and Peter as if they're watching a drama, not a death match. In District 13, she's openly hostile to the idea of being a hero. Those first propaganda shoots are a disaster because she cannot fake the speeches they hand her. What does she actually want? Over and over, she gives the same answer: to go home. Back to the woods, back to Prim, back to hunting and trading and being left alone by the Capitol and the rebels. There is a lot to uncover here, because that wish makes a lot of her behavior look selfish. When she refuses to cooperate on the propo, when she lashes out at Haymitch for manipulating her image, when she dodges leadership even as people beg her to step up, it reads as stubborn and ungrateful. Isn't this what a victor is supposed to do for their district? From a trauma lens, though, the selfishness is self-protection. Every time her image scales up, someone she loves pays. The girl on fire leads to Rue's death and District 11's unrest. The star-crossed lover routine makes Peter a constant target. The Mockingjay role gets Cinna killed, Prim sent to the front, and District 12 wiped out except for Victor's village. Her brain learns a brutal equation. More symbol equals more coffins. So of course she resists the role. Saying no to being the Mockingjay is, in her mind, saying no to more funerals. But then we hit the contradiction the story won't let you ignore. If Katniss keeps insisting she doesn't care about the revolution, why does she keep making choices that push it forward anyway? And here's the real question. Are those decisions actually about saving Panem, or about managing her own guilt and grief for the people she couldn't save in the games? Gale, Peter, and the selfish heart. Who does Katniss use? And that brings us straight to the two people who keep getting dragged into those choices whether they want to or not. Gale and Peter. If the revolution is the arena, then her relationships are the private games she keeps replaying in her own head. On paper, the dynamic is simple. Gale is the partner in survival and anger. He's the boy in the woods, the shared snares, the dark jokes about blowing up the Capitol. Peter is the partner in vulnerability and performance. He's the boy with the bread, the public confessions, the hand you hold when the cameras are on. At face value, it looks like a standard love triangle. But here's the real question. Why does Katniss keep both of them orbiting her, even when she claims she doesn't want either role they're offering? This is where we talk about Peter as a tool for survival long before he's a romantic choice. In the first games, she literally weaponizes their star-crossed lovers story. She kisses him for sponsors. She plays up the romance in the cave because Haymitch tells her it will keep them alive, even while her internal monologue is cataloguing angles and reactions. There is a lot to uncover here, because she also leans on him emotionally at the exact same time. He holds her after nightmares on the train. He grounds her when she's dissociating during the victory tour, and she still insists she's confused, that she doesn't owe him clarity yet. Is that cruelty or trauma economics? From a distance, it looks selfish. She takes his steady devotion, his status as the good victor, his ability to make the Capitol swoon, and she spends it to buy safety for both of them and her district. That part matters because she rarely asks what it costs him to be endlessly available while she stays non-committal. Keeping him in that role means she never has to fully admit how much she needs him, or how much it would destroy her if he died. But she does something very similar with Gale. Back in District 12, she relies on him to feed her family when she's gone, to hunt with her, to be the one person who understands the rage boiling under her skin. When she comes home after the first games, she slips right back into that routine, letting him carry the burden of her mother and Prim's safety while she's pulled into Capitol duties. She leans into his anger when it matches her own, when bombing the nut feels justified, and then pulls back hard when his methods or expectations scare her. So what's the pattern? Katniss often defers making a clear choice between them, and that's not just romantic indecision, it's emotional avoidance. By never fully choosing, she never has to fully lose. She keeps one foot in the woods and one on the train, one hand in rebellion and one in performance. The question is that just a teenager in a war zone, or a deeper strategy, keeping people close enough to help her survive, but far enough away that their deaths can't completely break her? And if that's true, what does it say about every selfless choice she makes next? Prim as Katniss's moral compass, and her biggest blind spot. If Katniss keeps everyone at arm's length, there's one exception you never question: Prim. This is where we talk about the center of Katniss's universe, the one relationship that actually gets full access. Every major choice she makes, it doesn't start with, is this good for Panem? It starts with, does this keep Prim safe? That part matters because it means her moral compass is pointed at a single person, not a whole district, not a movement. Think about the reaping. On paper, volunteering for your sister looks like the definition of selfless heroism. But here's the real question. Is she running toward Prim, or running away from a future where she has to live with the guilt of doing nothing. Her brain is wired by trauma and poverty to protect this one fragile piece of hope. Prim isn't just family, she's the last proof that the world can still be gentle. Once you see that, Catching Fire reads very differently. When Snow shows up in her Victor's village house, he doesn't threaten the revolution first. He threatens Prim. He makes it crystal clear: play the role, sell the romance, calm the districts, or your sister burns. Katniss agrees to the tour, the performance even to his unspoken terms, not because she suddenly cares about the political stability of Panem, but because the capital has its hand around Prim's throat. Later, when Plutarch and Coin want her as the Mockingjay, her conditions tell you everything. She doesn't start with strategy or demands for the districts. She starts with immunity for Prim and her family. Only then does she negotiate for other victors. At face value, that looks noble. She's using her power to protect people, but the order of operations gives her away. Prim first, everyone else if possible. So here's a pattern interrupt. If Coin had guaranteed Prim's safety from day one, no matter what Katniss did, do we honestly think she would have agreed to become the Mockingjay, or would she have vanished into some distant district, hunting in the woods until the games and the war burned themselves out? There is a lot to uncover here, because that hypothetical exposes how narrow her sense of duty really is. And then the story does the cruelest thing it can. The revolution, the very machine she fuels to protect Prim, kills Prim. The one non-negotiable promise she built her life around fails in a single explosion. Her entire ethical system collapses, because every compromise, every public execution, every speech was justified by "this will keep Prim alive." When that reason is gone, so is the story she tells herself about being a good person. Centering one person as your whole reason to live looks romantic from the outside. But it's also a kind of tunnel vision. Everyone else becomes background to that single relationship. The districts, the rebels, even Gale and Peter are important only in how they orbit Prim. And when that orbit disappears, we're going to cover what fills the vacuum, because something much darker rushes in to replace her. Is Katniss actually political? Collins says, not really. So if Prim was Katniss's whole orbit, what happens when the story insists on treating her as a revolutionary son for all of Panem? Here's the real question. Is Katniss actually political? Or did the rebellion just duct tape a revolution onto a girl whose brain is still stuck in District 12 survival mode? Suzanne Collins is very clear on this. Katniss is not a natural ideologue. She's not sitting there mapping out systems of oppression. She's counting squirrels, tallying tesserae, and trying to keep 3 people from starving to death. Her relationship to power is concrete and local. Will the peacekeeper at the fence shoot me today? Will the Capitol punish my family? Can I get enough to trade at the Hob? That part matters because it means her selfishness is happening inside a mind that was never built for grand strategy in the first place. Contrast that with Gale. Gale is political before we ever see a Mockingjay pin. He's angry at the games as an institution. He talks about blowing up the nut. He's thinking in terms of districts and systems and long-term costs. Boggs does the same on the military side, constantly weighing optics, casualties, and strategy. Plutarch? He's literally playing 4D chess with the entire capital, staging propos as moves in a propaganda war. These are people who wake up asking why the system works the way it does. Katniss wakes up asking, who do I have to save today so I can live with myself tomorrow? So when we judge her choices, there is a lot to uncover here. Expecting Katniss to make consistently selfless big-picture decisions is a bit like demanding that the firefighter running into a burning house also redesign the city's entire fire code on the way out. That's just not the role she's built for. Her skill set is immediate triage, one sister, one ally, one wounded victor at a time. You can call that narrow. You can also call it exactly what trauma and poverty trained her to do. This is where we talk about how the story weaponizes that tunnel vision. Snow counts on her to react emotionally, not strategically. He sends Peter back hijacked because he knows she'll fixate on one boy's suffering instead of the broader rebellion. Coin does the same thing in reverse, aiming Katniss like a camera at the right ruins, the right hospital, knowing she'll respond viscerally and give the Propo their raw power. Both of them are betting that she will never zoom out far enough to see the whole board. So when she pulls that final arrow and kills Coin instead of Snow, what is that? A sudden leap into pure political theory, or the most Katniss move imaginable? Is she sacrificing her personal revenge to protect the districts from a second tyrant, or just refusing to let another capital figure use dead children, including Prim, as a strategy ever again? We're going to cover whether that moment is her first truly selfless act for the greater good, or just another intensely personal decision that accidentally saves Panem. Selfishness in the second arena, catching fire's moral upgrades. So when Katniss kills Coin instead of Snow, you're seeing the end of a moral arc that really starts one book earlier. Catching fire is where her selfish, hyperlocal survival brain starts getting hijacked by something bigger. But here's the real question. Does she grow, or does the arena just upgrade the stakes around her until she can't stay small anymore? The setup of the Quarter Quell is the perfect test. She's a victor now, in that mansion in Victor's Village, with a public image the Capitol won't stop replaying. She's supposed to be safe. Instead, Snow announces that the tributes will be reaped from existing victors, and you watch the promise of win and you're done with the games evaporate in one sentence. That part matters because Katniss walks into this arena already knowing two things. The districts are restless, and every camera on her is a potential spark. At face value, her priority seems exactly the same as Book 1. Keep her person alive. Only this time, it isn't Prim, it's Peter. She and Haymitch even make opposite secret deals to save him. Why? On the surface, it's emotional attachment and guilt. Peter is the boy who took a beating to throw her bread, the one who carries her public relationship so she doesn't have to. But notice the shift. She isn't trying to get both of them out anymore. She's planning to die if that's what it takes to make sure the good one survives. This is where we talk about moral expansion through one person. Katniss starts to understand that Peter is more than her lifeline. He's become a symbol of hope. To the districts, he speaks well, he believes in unity, he can sell a future in a way she can't. Saving him isn't just about not losing the person who holds her softer self. It's about protecting the only victor who seems genuinely willing to represent something beyond revenge. Then the arena throws in people she should have no reason to care about. Mags, Wyrus, Beatty, Finnick. Watch how fast her circle widens once they're physically in front of her. She lets Mags take the place of a younger, fitter tribute. She risks herself to keep Wyrus alive long enough to decode the clock. She's confused, even angry that these older victors keep sacrificing for her. Why are they treating her survival as the priority? The answer, which no one bothers to loop her in on, is that many of them are literally working together to keep Katniss alive for the revolution. When she finds this out, she doesn't feel heroic. She feels used, tricked, and suddenly responsible for a rebellion she never consented to lead. There is a lot to uncover here. Her sense of selfishness flips. Now, Choosing her own death would be the selfish escape, because it would dump the consequences back on everyone else. So is Katniss becoming more selfless in catching fire, or just being dragged across a moral finish line by other people's plans? And if your agency keeps getting stolen, can your growth still count as yours? We're going to cover how that question explodes in Mockingjay, when being the Mockingjay stops being optional. Mockingjay mode. When self-preservation and revolution collide, when we hit Mockingjay, that question about agency doesn't just explode, it implodes. Katniss wakes up in District 13, and the so-called hero of the revolution is hiding in a hospital bed, sedated and begging to go back to the ashes of District 12. She's not plotting strategy, she's scanning for exits. Nightmares, flashbacks, dissociation, that numb floating feeling where you're watching your own life from the ceiling. This is a victor whose brain has decided the game's never ended. And in a way, they didn't. District 13 reads as safety on paper. Underground, regimented, no whips in the square. But for Katniss, it's another arena with fluorescent lights and strict schedules instead of mutts. You're told when to wake, when to eat, when to train. So why would someone whose entire survival instinct is built on hiding in the woods suddenly want to be the center of a war? She doesn't. Her most honest impulse in early Mockingjay is to withdraw from everything, including the war effort, and just vanish. So when Coin offers her the role of Mockingjay, at face value it looks heroic to say no. But here's the real question. Is that refusal selfish? Or is it the only sane response from someone with severe PTSD who has already been used as a symbol twice? Katniss's first instinct is, very clearly, self-preservation. She doesn't trust 13, doesn't trust Coin, and absolutely does not want more cameras pointed at her. Then the negotiation starts. Immunity for Peter and the other victors. Permission to hunt outside. The promise that Prim can keep her cat. That list sounds petty until you remember her entire relationship blueprint. Protect your tiny circle or lose everything. This is where we talk about trauma bargaining. She's not trying to run the revolution, she's trying to carve out a small pocket of control in a system that keeps rewriting the rules on her. Her terms are a mix of self-interest and protective instinct. She wants Peter safe because losing him would shatter whatever is left of her emotional world. But she also wants Annie, Johanna Enobaria, protected. That part matters because it shows her selfishness has expanded radius. Still narrow, still personal, but not just Prim and Gale anymore. It's a traumatized brain doing survival math with human beings as the variables. And once she agrees, her participation in the propo is relentlessly transactional. She'll wear the armor, shoot the arrows, deliver the lines, but only if it cashes out as concrete safety for her people. She doesn't believe in Coin's vision. She barely believes in the concept of future. She believes in getting Peter out, keeping Prim alive, maybe having a few hours in the woods. Pattern interrupt. The propaganda reels show a fiery revolutionary, all confidence and purpose. The reality is a girl who spends huge chunks of the book hiding in storage closets, refusing to talk, or freezing on camera until Haymitch has to drag her back to something genuine. Any victor will tell you the games don't end when you win. For Katniss in Mockingjay, they just changed arenas. So is that selfish, or just survival in a new costume? In the next section, we're going to cover what happens when her private survival logic finally collides with public executions and Coin's endgame. Peter in the Capitol, guilt, obligation, and who Katniss really fights for. So when Peter shows up on Capitol TV in Mockingjay, smiling through broken teeth and begging Katniss to stop the war, the arena doesn't just change, it shrinks. Her world collapses down to one face on a screen. That part matters because this is where we talk about who Katniss is really fighting for. The districts see a propaganda war. Coin sees a strategic asset. Snow sees a weapon. Katniss sees the boy who handed her burnt bread in the rain and then got hijacked for it. Watch her reaction. She's not just horrified that Peter's being tortured, she's horrified that it's happening because of her. Every broadcast feels like a delayed consequence of the berries, of the quarter quell, of daring to survive the games the wrong way. At face value, her rage is political. The Capitol is brainwashing victors. But here's the real question. Why does every conversation with Coin, every negotiation with Plutarch, circle back to one demand? You have to rescue Peter. District 13 sells her a promise. Do the propos, wear the Mockingjay, play the role, and we will keep Peter alive. We're going to cover the strategy in another section, but psychologically, that deal is everything. Katniss doesn't suddenly become ideological. She becomes transactional. She'll be their symbol, but only if they protect the person whose suffering she can't compartmentalize. The rebellion wants her to fight for thousands. She signs up to fight for one. Is that selfish? On paper, yes. The fate of the entire rebellion keeps taking a backseat to one boy from her district. She freezes during speeches when Peter appears on screen. She risks a fragile alliance by demanding a rescue mission that's militarily risky and not strictly necessary. From Coin's perspective, that's a nightmare. Your key symbol is emotionally hostage to a single captured victor. But then flip it. How many people would repeatedly walk into gunfire, bombings, and collapsing buildings to save someone who might never be the same, who might even kill you on sight? Katniss does. She volunteers herself as a target in the Capitol airstrikes. She agrees to keep performing on camera while Peter's torture escalates, knowing every word she says might be used to hurt him more. There is a lot to uncover here about guilt turning into a form of selfless obsession. Trauma bonding is the quiet engine under all of this. Katniss and Peter are the only two people from District 12 who shared 2 arenas, 2 games, 2 near deaths. He knows what it smells like when the blood hits the sand. She knows what his voice sounds like when the cannons stop. You can tell yourself you should care about abstract thousands, but your nervous system cares about the person who held your hand while you waited for the hovercraft. So when Katniss insists that Peter must be part of the final mission to kill Snow, even though he's unstable, even though he's literally been programmed to murder her, is that recklessly selfish or a twisted form of trust? On one hand, she might be clinging to the only relationship that makes sense to her, dragging him into danger so she doesn't have to face the Capitol or Coin alone. On the other hand, she might be the only one in the rebellion who still sees Peter as a person instead of damaged property, insisting he deserves the same right to choose his role that she fought for. And here's the real question. When your whole identity is built on surviving the games, what happens when your most selfish attachment is also the only thing keeping you in the fight at all? In the next section, we'll test that by looking at what Katniss does when Peter becomes a direct threat to her mission and to her life. District 12 in ashes. When the personal becomes political. So when Peter becomes a weapon in the Capitol's hands, where do you even go from there? You go home. Except when Katniss goes home, there is no home. District 12 is a smear of ash on the landscape. The film gives you that slow hover over blackened ruins. The book lingers on the smell, the crunch of bone under her boots, the knowledge that those aren't just anonymous bodies. Those are the kids who stood in the reaping square with her, the woman who sold her buttons, the butcher's son. Almost everyone she grew up with is dead. At face value, this is just another atrocity from the Capitol. But here's the real question. What does it do to Katniss's moral compass when the entire map of her childhood has been turned into a mass grave? She doesn't fall to her knees sobbing. She goes quiet, numb. That part matters because trauma doesn't always show up as dramatic breakdowns. Sometimes it's an almost clinical inventory. She walks the ruins, counts the bodies in her head, and the silence is so total it feels like a judgment. And underneath that numbness, there's rage. Not the clean, heroic kind the rebellion wants to film. It's tangled with guilt. She was in the Capitol, spinning in wedding dresses and doing interviews, while the bombers were already in the air. If she hadn't become the symbol, would Snow have targeted 12? If she'd died in the arena, would these people still be alive? We're going to cover this survival guilt pattern more later, but here it fuses her personal story to the Capitol's politics in a way she can't undo. Up to this point, her circle of concern has been brutally narrow. Prim, her mother, Gale, then Peter. Everyone else is background noise in the games. District kids become the boy from 1, the girl from 2. But walking through 12's ruins forces a shift. When a whole district is wiped out, you can't keep pretending the Capitol's cruelty is just something that happens to you and the people you love. It's systemic. It's policy. It's what Snow does to anyone who threatens the relationship between fear and order. So when Coin asks her to be the Mockingjay after that visit, what's really driving the yes? Is it a selfless promise to save other districts from becoming 12? Or is it the very personal need to make Snow pay for the bodies in the street and the ghosts in her head? There is a lot to uncover here. The propaganda version says she's fighting for hope. The psychological version says she's fighting to make her pain mean something. And this is where we talk about the problem. When revenge and justice feel identical in your body, can you honestly separate selfish motives from noble ones? Because the way Katniss answers that question in the ruins of 12 is exactly what will explode in the execution square at the end. The execution arrow. Killing Coin is Katniss's most selfish act. So when we land in that execution square, all of that blurred revenge justice wiring is already humming in Katniss's nervous system. Snow is tied to the post. Coin is elevated above him, literally on a higher platform, and Panem is staring down the barrel of one last arrow. On paper, this should be the clean ending the Capitol promised. For every Hunger Games, villain exposed, crowd assembled, execution broadcast. Katniss in her Mockingjay suit, bow raised, is the perfect closing image. But here's the real question. Why does she break the script at the exact second she's meant to fulfill it? At face value, you think she's aiming at Snow, the man who destroyed District 12, ordered public whippings, poisoned his way to power. The personal scorecard is miles long. But in that pause, she runs a different kind of calculation. Coin has just proposed a symbolic new Hunger Games, using Capitol children. She's framed it as justice, as balance. That part matters because it tells Katniss exactly what kind of leader Coin plans to be. This is where we talk about pattern recognition. Katniss has spent 3 books being turned into a symbol by whoever holds the cameras. Snow dresses her up as a love-struck victor. Coin dresses her up as a war hero. Same game, different district. So when Coin casually votes for more games, When she's manipulated Prim's presence at the front to secure a propaganda win, Katniss doesn't just see a rival politician, she sees the games being reset under a new logo. So why the arrow at Coin instead of Snow? One reason is brutally political. Snow is already finished. He's coughing blood, surrounded by enemies, his regime structurally collapsed. Killing him would be emotionally satisfying, sure, but it changes nothing about Panem's future. Assassinating Coin in front of the entire country is Katniss's first overtly ideological move. She chooses the long-term good of the districts over the short-term rush of finally taking her shot at the man who tormented her. But here's the pattern interrupt. That doesn't mean the decision is pure, because underneath the revolution logic, there's something raw and selfish happening. If Coin lives, Katniss is locked in forever as the Mockingjay. Endless tours, speeches, staged relationships, children trotted out for interviews. Her trauma becomes a permanent media franchise by decapitating the new regime at the exact moment it tries to crown itself. She's also cutting herself free from a lifetime contract she never signed. So is that selfish or self-preserving? Suzanne Collins has said Katniss isn't naturally political. Her circle is tiny. Coin threatens that circle, maybe even ordered the bombing that killed Prim. Removing Coin is revenge, survival, and statecraft in a single shot. And that's the paradox. The most selfish thing she ever does, refusing to be anyone's pawn again, is also the move that blocks a second dictatorship. She protects her own autonomy and accidentally protects Panem's. Which raises the next problem we're going to cover. If your selfish act saves the world, what does that do to your guilt? After the war, is Katniss's retreat to the victor's village selfish? So if your selfish shot at Coin saves an entire country, what do you do next? Do you stay and rule the ruins of the capital? Or do you walk away to a half-empty victor's village with a boy who once tried to strangle you? When the war ends, Katniss doesn't ride off as the triumphant hero. She collapses. We're talking severe depression, dissociation, suicidal ideation, the whole thing. She's sedated, burned, half feral in that hospital garden. At face value, it looks less girl on fire and more girl whose nervous system finally crashed. She is institutionalized for months because her brain has been running the games non-stop for years, and it finally taps out. And then the choice comes, not on a podium, but in paperwork and quiet conversations. Go back to District 12. Live in the only untouched part of it, Victor's Village, the place that survived when everyone else burned. There is a lot to uncover here, because symbolically, that move is loaded. The victor retreats to the mansion while the districts rebuild the ashes. So is that selfish? She helped break the world and then checked out. That's one reading. She doesn't stay in the capital to testify in every trial. She doesn't join Plutarch's new government. She doesn't become the permanent Mockingjay on state TV. Instead, she hunts. She gardens. She and Peter rebuild a book of plants. Eventually, they raise children who play in a meadow built over mass graves. Meanwhile, other people write laws, design elections, and answer the endless why questions of a traumatized population. Here's the real question. Was long-term activism ever a realistic promise for someone whose entire personality was wired around narrow survival and protecting a tiny circle? Suzanne Collins has said Katniss is not naturally political. She's a provider from a starving district, not a theorist. Trauma science backs this up. When your brain has been in threat mode since age 11, your focus narrows. You scan for danger, not policy. From a trauma-informed view, her withdrawal isn't a selfish luxury. It's the only way she doesn't end up dead by her own hand. That part matters because a selfless Katniss who stays in the capital as a permanent symbol is basically signing up for a lifetime of being re-objectified. Different regime, same cage. The games never end, they just rebrand. This is where we talk about honest limits. Katniss can kill coin. She can refuse to endorse a new cycle of child sacrifice, but she cannot also be Panem's president, therapist, and moral compass. Expecting that would just recreate the same exploitative relationship the Capitol had with its victors. Drain them for hope, then discard them. So would staying in the Capitol have been more selfless, or just another way of sacrificing her humanity on the altar of other people's expectations? And if she had done that, would we actually call that noble, or just a slower, socially approved form of self-destruction? Because her retreat sets up one last problem we're going to cover. When a survivor finally chooses a small, quiet life, does that heal the guilt, or does it haunt them in every peaceful moment that follows? Selfishness, feminism, and the unlikable heroine problem. So when Katniss retreats into that small, quiet life, there's another layer we have to talk about. It's not just personal psychology, it's gender. Because Katniss doesn't exist in a vacuum. She drops into a long tradition of what people call the unlikable female protagonist. Women on the page who are angry, closed off, self-interested, or just not that warm, and who get punished by readers for traits we shrug off in male heroes all the time. We'll tolerate a brooding, emotionally distant man with a tragic backstory. We call him complicated. But when a girl does the same thing, suddenly the word selfish shows up a lot faster. This is where we talk about Katniss's specific brand of not nice. At face value, she fails almost every traditional test of good girl behavior. She's not nurturing in the way Prim is. She's blunt with Peter, with Haymitch, with the prep team. She doesn't perform constant gratitude for sponsors or mentors. Half the time she's irritated with them. She resents being turned into a symbol for the districts. She doesn't radiate hope on command, and she spends most of the game scanning for threats instead of for emotional connection. None of that is accidental. Here's the real question. If a boy from District 12 hunted illegally, snapped at people, hated crowds, and only cared about his little sister and a couple of friends, would we be having a moral crisis about his soul? Or just calling him a classic survival protagonist? Think about Gale's anger, or even Haymitch's corrosive sarcasm. Their self-protective distance reads as rough edges. Katniss's distance is more often framed as a character flaw that needs to be fixed. That part matters because a lot of the she's selfish accusations are really she's not nurturing enough in disguise. She doesn't comfort Peter the way some viewers want. She doesn't give Gale the romantic closure he thinks he deserves. She refuses to smile on cue for the Capitol. She will not promise love where she feels confusion. In a culture that expects heroines to be endlessly emotionally available, that blunt refusal looks harsher than it actually is. Suzanne Collins has said Katniss is not naturally political. She's focused on survival and her tiny circle. So Collins makes a very deliberate craft choice. She writes a girl who is not nice, not eager to please, and not naturally selfless, then drops her into a story that keeps insisting she's a savior. There is a lot to uncover here, because it forces you to separate goodness from likability. Is moral worth about being warm and expressive, or about what you actually do under impossible pressure? And here's the last twist we're going to cover before we move on. If you gender flipped everything, same trauma, same attachment style, same moves in the arena, same decision to withdraw after the war, would we still be debating whether Katniss Everdeen was secretly selfish? Or would we just nod, call him a complex victor, and move on to ranking his coolest scenes? Hold that question, because the next step is to test it against her most controversial choices, one by one. When selfish is just a nervous system trying to survive. So if we're not just calling her a complex victor and walking away, what's actually driving those selfish moments everyone points to? This is where we talk about the nervous system, not just the narrative. Quick recap of the trauma science we've already touched. Hypervigilance means your brain is constantly scanning for threat, especially in a district where starvation is a weekly question, not a metaphor. Fight/flight means your body is wired to react fast, not fairly. Emotional numbing kicks in so you can get through the day without collapsing. Put those together and your focus narrows to two things: immediate danger and the handful of people who feel like your entire world. Once you see that, Katniss's selfish decisions start to rearrange themselves. Prioritizing Prim over strangers at the reaping. At face value, that's favoritism. But in trauma terms, Prim is her primary attachment figure, the person her nervous system has decided equals safety and purpose. Losing Prim would not just be sad, it would annihilate the one relationship holding her together. Of course, she moves for Prim, and not for some other 12-year-old. Her brain literally does not weigh them equally. Same with the star-crossed lovers narrative. On paper, she's using Peter and the audience to get sponsors and survive the games. Cold, manipulative. But here's the real question. What does a hypervigilant, half-starved 17-year-old do when the Capitol turns her into live entertainment? She grabs whatever script keeps her and her ally alive one more day. That part matters because in a fight/flight state, morality shrinks to, will this stop us from dying right now? People call it selfish that she stalls, demands conditions, insists on Peter's immunity. But a traumatized brain hears symbol of the revolution as more cameras, more threats, more people you might watch die because of you. Of course she clings to her small circle. Of course she obsesses over Peter's safety. That's her nervous system trying to keep its last stable attachment from being ripped away on live TV. Trauma research is blunt about this. When you live in constant threat, your capacity for wide empathy drops, not because you're secretly evil, but because your brain is triaging. You care, but you literally cannot hold the whole district in your head while you're bracing for the next explosion. From the outside, that looks self-centered. From the inside, it's survival math. And no, this doesn't erase the impact. People still get hurt when Katniss chooses Prim over the nameless, Peter over the plan. But it shifts the moral frame from bad person making cruel choices to injured person doing the best she can inside a broken system and a rewired brain. So if that's true, here's the real question. Who's actually benefiting from Katniss looking selfish? Because the real villain of her so-called selfishness isn't Katniss at all. It's the Capitol's design of a world where being truly, widely selfless is almost impossible without dying. In the next part, we're going to cover how that design turns every moral choice she makes into a rigged game. The Capitol's game, forcing selfishness, then televising it. So if that's true, here's the real question. What happens when you drop a traumatized teenager into a system that is literally engineered to make her look selfish? This is where we talk about the architecture of the games themselves. 24 kids go in, one victor comes out. That's not a story about community, that's a math problem with a body count. The arena is a closed ecosystem where resources are scarce on purpose. Water is hidden. Food is booby-trapped. The cornucopia is a murder funnel. At face value, you're watching kids make choices. In reality, the capital has already made the only choice that matters. Cooperate too long, and you die. So why do alliances even exist? Why can Rue and Katniss share that moment of trust? Why can the careers roam as a pack? Because temporary cooperation makes the inevitable betrayal more dramatic on television. The relationship is the content. The rule is always the same. You will, at some point, have to prioritize yourself over the person standing next to you. Kindness isn't just risky. Kindness is a countdown. And then the capital broadcasts all of this. Every hesitation, every grabbed backpack, every time a tribute refuses to share. The audience is invited to judge, to pick favorites, to ask, why didn't they help that kid? While ignoring the reason there was only one loaf of bread in the first place. There is a lot to uncover here. The games manufacture situations where selfish behavior is the only way to survive, and then turn those coerced choices into entertainment and propaganda. Katniss's most controversial arena decisions, they're exactly what this maze is designed to produce. Her initial plan with Peter is brutal. Keep her distance, let him go if she has to. In the book, she's very clear that her primary mission is getting back to Prim, not saving a boy from the bakery. When she hesitates to help other tributes, when she prioritizes Peter's life and her own over strangers, she's doing what every victor before her has been rewarded for doing. Calling her selfish without naming the system is like blaming a lab rat for pressing the food lever instead of freeing the other rats. You're angry at the poor, not the scientist. That part matters because the capital depends on that misdirection. If you're busy judging Katniss's moral purity, you're not asking why a government built a child death maze and put cameras in every corner. But here's the pattern interrupt. What if Katniss's real rebellion isn't her survival instinct at all? What if it's the moment when she refuses to play the pure self-interest game? Mourning Rue with flowers, risking everything for Peter with the berries. Volunteering for Prim when every survival lesson she's ever learned says, stay out of it. Those are the times she breaks the script the capital wrote for her. And in the next section, we're going to cover how those flashes of genuine selflessness become more dangerous to Snow than any arrow she ever fires. Rue, Thresh, and the limits of Katniss's empathy. So when Katniss steps into the arena, who actually fits inside that tiny circle she's willing to break the rules for? This is where we talk about Rue. At face value, Rue is just another tribute, another child the games are feeding into the machine. But Katniss doesn't see District 11 female. She sees Prim, the small hands, the soft voice, the way Rue points out the tracker-jacker nest, the way Prim would quietly correct her plant identifications. That part matters because it shows her empathy doesn't suddenly expand to all 23 other tributes. It expands to one girl who slips into an existing slot in Katniss's emotional world. Here's the real question. Is that selfless or is that projection? Rue becomes a stand-in for the sister Katniss promised to protect, helping Rue with the tracker-jackers, sharing food, trusting her with the Mockingjay signal. Those moves are risky, but they're still operating on a very personal equation. If I can't save Prim, I will not fail her double. It's tender, but it's also targeted. Then Rue dies, and the script of the games says, move on, use the distraction, survive. Instead, Katniss stops. She sings. She arranges the flowers around Rue's body. a careful, almost ritual act that has no strategic upside. If anything, it paints a target on her back. She is telling the capital, and every district watching, this was a person, not a prop. That's one of the clearest selfless acts we ever see from her. No alliance advantage, no sponsor bait, just grief and defiance. And yet, the arena doesn't let that moment stay contained. It ripples. Thresh hears how she honored Rue. When he corners Katniss at the cornucopia, he has every reason to kill her. One more rival gone. Better odds. Instead, he says, "Just this one time, I let you go." For the little girl, that's the selfishness script breaking in real time. Katniss's empathy for Rue buys her a mercy she never planned for. The games run on fear and scarcity, but suddenly you see a different currency, remembered kindness. So why doesn't that happen with everyone? Katniss doesn't mourn the careers individually. She doesn't build shrines for every fallen tribute. Marvel dies and she's furious, but it's about Rue, not Marvel himself. The boy from District 3, the morphling addicts in Catching Fire. She feels flashes of pity, but she doesn't reorganize her whole survival strategy around them. Her bandwidth is limited, brutally so. There is a lot to uncover here, because if she can risk everything to bury Rue in flowers, but barely register other deaths unless they touch her inner circle, what does that make her? A selfish victor in the making, or a human being whose empathy is being rationed by trauma and design? And when that same pattern shows up with Peter, Gale, even Coin, does it stay understandable or start to look a lot darker? Gale's fire versus Peter's bread, two mirrors for Katniss's selfishness. So when people call Katniss selfish, you can't really answer that without talking about the two people who know her best. The boy with the fire and the boy with the bread. Because Gale and Peter aren't just love interests. They're two moral mirrors, and each one reflects a different version of who Katniss might become. At face value, Gale is the one who gets her. Same district, same hunger, same illegal hunts in the woods. He embodies her rage at the games and the capital, but he scales it up. Where Katniss is focused on prim and survival, Gale is thinking in terms of districts, strategies, body counts. This is where we talk about anger as a worldview. For Gale, if you're not all in on revolution, you're part of the problem. You see that when he starts pushing her after the first games, when she hesitates to embrace being the Mockingjay, his frustration leaks out. This is bigger than you, bigger than your family. He doesn't say selfish, but the accusation is there. Why won't you use your power the way I think you should? Why won't you sacrifice your personal terror for the cause? Gale's pride turns her trauma responses into a moral failing. Peter is the opposite pole. He's not planning bombing runs. He's worrying about who you become when you're forced to kill. His "I don't want them to change me" speech is basically a manifesto against Katniss's survival tunnel vision. She's thinking, don't die. He's thinking, don't lose yourself. Here's the real question. In a world built on the games, which one of those sounds more selfish? Peter calls her out too, but in a different register. When she uses the star-crossed lovers narrative, when she kisses him for the cameras and then emotionally checks out, he notices. He pulls back on the train, he gets cold in Catching Fire. He's essentially saying, I'll die for you, but I won't be your prop. That part matters because it forces Katniss to see that using people to stay alive isn't morally neutral, even if the system taught her it was. So she bounces between them. Gale's clarity and shared rage feel honest. They validate her hatred of the capital and the games. Peter's empathy feels dangerous because it asks her to care beyond Prim, beyond her own guilt threshold. There is a lot to uncover here. Every time she leans into Gale, she leans into the idea that one more sacrifice is worth it. Every time she leans into Peter, she leans into the idea that every person, even herself, still has value. Here's the pattern interrupt. What if the love triangle was never really about which boy she loves more? What if it's about which moral framework she can live with, and which version of her own selfishness she can stand to look at in the mirror? Because Gale's world says, if you're not willing to burn for the future, you're selfish. Peter's world says, if you're willing to burn everyone else for your mission, you've already lost. And Katniss is stuck in the middle, trying to survive both the games and the expectations of the two people who refuse to let her stay a simple, selfish victor. The question is, when everything finally breaks, which mirror does she shatter, and which one does she step through? If Katniss grew up safe, a thought experiment on true selfishness. So let's break that mirror in a different way. No reaping bowl, no tesserae, no peacekeepers breathing down your neck. Her father never dies in the mine. Her mother never shuts down. District 12 is poor, sure, but it's stable. Here's the real question. Who is Katniss Everdeen when survival isn't the only game she's playing? Because underneath the fire and the cameras, we already know her core settings. She's introverted, observant, stubborn to the point of self-sabotage, and fiercely protective of a tiny inner circle. There is a lot to uncover here if you imagine those same traits growing in a world that doesn't constantly threaten to kill her or the people she loves. In that safer timeline, Katniss is still the older sister who walks Prim to school and stands between her and any threat. But that part matters because the threats are now mean classmates, unfair teachers, maybe a corrupt merchant, not a televised execution. Her protectiveness could turn into being the friend who quietly walks you home, the student who refuses to snitch, the teenager who will absolutely get detention rather than let someone else be humiliated. Her introversion, without trauma, it reads as shyness, not emotional shutdown. She's the kid sitting at the edge of the playground, cataloging every social dynamic, not because she's scanning for danger, but because observation is her comfort zone. You can easily see her as a quiet activist, the one who notices when the coal rations are unfair and starts a petition instead of an uprising. Same data-gathering brain, different outlet. Her stubbornness, which in the books hardens into defiance against the capital, might stay more domestic, arguing with her dad about hunting regulations, refusing to back down when a local official bends the rules, pushing her mother to treat more patients who can't pay. At face value, that still looks selfish sometimes. Katniss won't let this go. But the stakes are pride and principle, not life or death. Now flip back to canon. Same traits, different environment. Starvation compresses her world until the only moral question that matters is, do Prim and eyes her protectiveness, turning it into a reason to volunteer, to kill, to perform romance for an audience. Her introversion turns into emotional distance. Her stubbornness becomes refusal to trust anyone's promise, especially from a victor-maker capital that treats her as a symbol, not a person. So when people call her selfish for hoarding food, for pushing Peter away, for wanting to run from the rebellion, they're judging a plant that's been forced to grow toward a single sliver of light. This is where we talk about context as destiny. Change the light, and the shape changes. Which means maybe the real question isn't, was Katniss selfish? But what does Panem force every one of its children to become just to stay alive? And once you see that, you have to ask, Who in this story ever had the freedom to be their true self at all? Rewatching the trilogy with a new lens, spotting selfish moments. So once you start asking who Katniss could have been in a different light, you can't really watch the trilogy the same way again. The question shifts. Every scene becomes, what is Panem forcing her to be right now? To make that practical, you can run a tiny checklist in your head. When Katniss makes a choice, ask, who is she protecting? What threat does she think is in the room? How much time does she have to decide? And who trained her to respond this way? The seam, the games, or the Capitol cameras? That part matters because it turns "is she selfish?" into what survival program just got activated. At face value, she's just rude to the charming, half-naked Victor with the sugar cubes. But here's the real question. Who does she think he is? A capital plaything who sells his body, an ally of Snow, a reminder that Victors are property. Her brain tags him as a threat to her safety and to Peter's. No time to process, no reason to trust, so she defaults to distance and contempt. Selfish? Or the reflex of a girl who's learned that beautiful people from the capital's orbit usually mean pain? Same with her reluctance to comfort others. Rue's family, the morphling who dies for Peter, even Johanna breaking down in District 13, you see Katniss freeze, shut down, pull away. It can read as emotionally stingy. But we're going to cover a hard truth about trauma here. Soothing someone else means opening your own defenses. In a world where crying could get your sister killed, emotional avoidance isn't cruelty, it's armor. Her outbursts at Haymitch are another perfect test case. She claws him, screams at him, blames him for everything. On the surface, that's pure self-centered rage. But again, who is she protecting? Prim, Peter, herself from unbearable guilt. Haymitch is the safest person to attack because he's already broken. The relationship is built on mutually assured destruction. This is where we talk about displaced anger as a survival strategy, not just a character flaw. And then the big one, her vote for a symbolic Hunger Games using capital children. It's one of the coldest moments in the series. You can absolutely read it as vengeful, even sadistic, or you can see a girl still trapped in the game's logic, performing cruelty to convince Coin she's compliant long enough to get within shooting range. Is that selfish, or a final desperate play to end the system that made any of this seem reasonable? Once you start applying this lens, you can't stop with Katniss. Johanna's abrasiveness, Haymitch's alcoholism, even Snow's obsession with control start to look like different survival styles under the same capital machine. There is a lot to uncover here, because if everyone is shaped by the same threat, where do we draw the line between villainy and adaptation? And if that boundary isn't where you thought it was, what does that do to the entire hero versus villain story you've been watching this whole time? So, was Katniss Everdeen actually selfish? So when you stack all of that together, trauma, the capital machine, everyone adapting in their own warped way, where does Katniss actually land? Is she selfish, or is she the hero the districts keep insisting she is? Let's pull the threads tight. She grows up in District 12, starvation, loses her father in an explosion, watches her mother emotionally disappear, and becomes the family's main hunter at 11. Her attachment style is basically small circle or nothing. Prim, maybe her mother on a good day, Gale at the fence. That part matters because it explains why her care never magically expands to all humanity. Her nervous system is in survival mode, not in philosophical revolution mode. So here's the real question. When she volunteers for Prim, is that selfless Or is that a brutal calculation that she simply cannot live in a world where she let Prim walk into the arena? The books push you toward the second. It's love, yes, but it's also self-preservation of her own psyche. The same pattern shows up with Peter. At face value, she's the devoted partner who risks everything for him. Underneath, she's clinging to the one person who carries her hope, her goodness, her memories of the games that don't destroy her. We're going to cover the berries, coin, and Prim in that same light. The Nightlock stunt? It absolutely endangers everyone by forcing the Capital's hand. But it's also the only move that keeps her and Peter from being separated or turned into mutts for the cameras. Shooting coin instead of snow? That's not a clean, selfless martyr move. It's Katniss refusing to live through a second generation of games, especially with Prim's death already tearing her apart. So is she selfish? On one tier, yes. She prioritizes her own survival and the survival of her tiny attachment circle with almost ruthless focus. She does not wake up wanting to save every district child. She wakes up wanting Prim alive, Gale out of the mines, Peter not tortured in some capital cell. Clinically, a trauma survivor narrowing their world to what they can bear is expected, not evil. On the next tier, no, she's not selfish in the sense of callous disregard. She repeatedly risks her life for people she barely knows. The morphling who saves Peter, Rue, the wounded in District 8. Once her empathy gets triggered, she just doesn't start from abstract ideology. She starts from relationship. And mostly, she's something harder to market. A realistic teenager with a bow and a nervous system on fire, trapped in an impossible system. That's where we talk about why the story works. Her selfish limits make her compelling because they feel human. Her moral ambiguity forces you to ask, under that level of threat, would you really do better? Pattern interrupt here. If Katniss had been perfectly selfless, a saintly symbol who always chose the greater good without flinching, the story would actually be less honest and far less dangerous to the kind of capital systems it's critiquing. A flawless hero reassures power, a messy one exposes it. So the verdict isn't a clean yes or no, it's that her so-called selfishness is the exact reason her revolution, and ours, as readers, feels real. But if Katniss isn't purely selfless, then why do the districts still cling to her as their mockingjay? That's where we need to go next. What Katniss teaches us about our own selfish selves. And here's where it stops being just about Panem and starts being about you. Because when you watch Katniss, it's easy to think, well, sure, I'd volunteer for my sister too. But here's the real question. Would you still say that if your own life already felt like District 12 on a bad winter, when your rent, your job, your relationships all feel one missed paycheck away from collapse? Panem runs on literal scarcity. Ours runs on economic precarity, social media comparison, and burnout. Different tools, same games. When you're refreshing your banking app, doom scrolling everyone else's perfect life, or dragging yourself through a 12-hour shift, your circle of care shrinks. Not because you're evil, because your brain is quietly going, we are not safe. Her father's death, her mother's collapse, the constant threat of starvation, those are her unpaid bills and overfull inbox. So when she seems selfish, when she shuts down emotionally or pushes Peter away, that part matters because it's a survival system, not a moral confession. There is a lot to uncover here. How often do you call yourself selfish for saying no to a friend when you're exhausted, for not answering a message right away, for choosing a quiet night alone over helping someone move? Again, at face value, those choices can look self-centered. But if you borrow the lens we used on Katniss, the questions change. Instead of why am I such a bad person, you ask, what am I protecting? Your energy, your mental health, your sense of safety after your own version of a quarter quell year. And then the second question, what system is forcing me into these choices? Is it a workplace that treats you as endlessly available? A family dynamic where you're the default caregiver? An online culture that tells you any boundary is a betrayal? This is where we talk about radical empathy. The Hunger Games doesn't give you a flawless hero. It gives you a traumatized teenager who makes messy, sometimes harmful decisions. The story doesn't excuse the harm. Rue still dies. Prim still dies, but it does insist you understand why Katniss can't carry everyone, why her relationship to sacrifice is tangled up with guilt and fear. And that's the invitation. If Katniss can be both a symbol of hope for the districts and a scared girl clinging to her small circle, then maybe your selfish moments are also more complicated than your harshest self-judgment admits. So if she deserves that complexity and compassion, maybe we do too. Maybe the quiet revolution, under all the explosions and fire, is learning to see our own survival strategies with that same nuance, before we decide we're the villain of our story. But if we start treating ourselves that way, what does it do to the systems that profit from our guilt? That's where we're going to cover the bigger, uncomfortable implications next. If you love overthinking, Panem, you're in the right place. And if you're still here, overanalyzing one traumatized archer's attachment style, you've probably noticed something. We haven't just been talking about Katniss. We've been talking about you, about me, about anyone who's ever wondered why survival can feel selfish, and why the people in power are very invested in you believing that. So this is where we talk about what this channel actually is. At face value, sure, it's a Hunger Games channel. We zoom into District 12's coal dust, the Capitol's roses, the exact wording of a quarter quell card. But here's the real question. Why stop at that was a cool scene when you can ask what it does to a 14-year-old brain growing up under a death lottery? If you're new here, and this Katniss deep dive is your first visit to our little corner of Panem, the fact that you've made it this far is telling. Most people tap out when we start throwing around attachment theory in the seam and assassination ethics in the Capitol. You stayed to argue with the idea that volunteering for Prim might be self-preserving, not purely saintly. That probably means you're our kind of person. What we're going to cover on this channel over and over is that intersection between story and psychology. We go long form, we get lore heavy, we ask why Snow builds Victor's village the way a therapist might ask why your brain built certain defenses. We break down the relationship between a district and its victors the same way we'd break down the relationship between a child and a parent who keeps changing the rules. If you want quick rankings or who would win in a fight tournaments, the Capitol's got plenty of flashy broadcasts for that. Here, we're more interested in questions like, is Katniss actually selfish? Or a sheer case study in how trauma rewires your sense of responsibility? What does it mean that the girl on fire hates being a symbol but keeps getting pushed back into the arena? So, if this is your first time wandering into our version of Victor's Village, and you're realizing, uncomfortably, that you enjoy picking apart Panem one morally messy character at a time, consider sticking around. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, join the little Victor's Village of people who see I volunteer and immediately wonder what her nervous system was doing in that moment. And if you're returning, you already know what's coming. More character site breakdowns, more world-building speculation, more book versus movie comparisons where that tiny cut scene suddenly changes the entire emotional arc. There is a lot to uncover here. From Gale's moral calculus to Peter's coping strategies, from Snow's propaganda to coins. Because once you start seeing these stories this way, you can't unsee them. And the next step is asking what that means for the real systems we live in, which is exactly where we're headed next. Your turn. Is Katniss a hero, a survivor, or something else? Because here's the real question. When you watch Katniss move through these games and these districts, who do you actually see? A hero, a survivor, or someone who keeps refusing the role everyone tries to pin on her? At face value, it's easy to say, she volunteered for Prim, she must be selfless. But after everything we've covered about trauma, survival guilt, and how narrow her attachment circle really is, does that still hold up for you? Do you personally read Katniss as selfish, selfless, or just brutally honest about her limits? And which single scene most changed your mind about her motives? This is where we talk about your own relationship with her. I want you to name 2 moments. First, one moment where you judged Katniss harshly on your first watch or first read. Maybe it was how quickly she wrote off Peter at the start of the first games, or how cold she seems to the other tributes who aren't in her tiny circle. Second, one moment where you felt unexpectedly protective of her. Was it Rue's death and that improvised funeral for a child she barely knew? Or the way she collapses after Prim's death in a way no propaganda reel could ever use? There is a lot to uncover here in how we react to her. Are you more angry when she uses Peter in the cave? Or more sympathetic when you remember the Capitol is literally threatening her district in real time? Do you see the Nightlock berries as a noble act of rebellion, or a desperate teenager refusing to be the Capitol's toy for even one more second? Your answers say as much about your own moral instincts as they do about hers, and I want you to feel free to disagree hard but respectfully. The fandom has never really settled the selfish versus self-preserving debate, and maybe it shouldn't. Multiple readings can coexist. You can believe she's a reluctant hero and still admit that some of her choices are driven by raw fear. You can see her as a traumatized kid whose selfish decisions accidentally ignite a revolution without turning her into a flawless symbol of hope. So here's a mini challenge. Rewatch one scene, the berries, Rue's death, or Coin's execution. Pick your favorite, or the one that always bothered you. Then, through the lens of everything we're going to cover about trauma and survival, ask yourself, does this feel heroic, strategic, or purely self-protective now? Drop your before and after interpretation, because the truth is, some of the best future deep dives are going to come straight from what you bring up here. If you're arguing that Gale's morality is actually worse than Snow's in certain moments, or that Coin's promise of a better world was always rigged, or that Peter's trauma and agency deserve their own full breakdown, that part matters because those questions reshape how we read every scene. And one of those questions, especially about Peter, takes us somewhere much darker than anything we've touched yet. Much darker than anything we've touched yet. Because there is a lot to uncover here that we've only skimmed. We've barely talked about Katniss's relationship with her mother, which is one of the most quietly brutal relationships in the whole series. You have a parent who emotionally checks out after the mine explosion, a child who steps into the role of provider, and then years later, that same parent is suddenly supposed to be mom again in Victor's village. At face value, that looks cold on Katniss's side. But here's the real question. Is that selfishness or a trauma bond that never healed? This is where we talk about motherhood in a different sense too. Katniss as a future mother. She spends 3 books saying she'll never have children because she refuses to feed more bodies to the games. Then, in the epilogue, she has kids. People argue over whether that's hopeful or a betrayal of her core promise to herself. Why does she change? Is it Peter's influence, the absence of the capital, or sheer exhaustion with fighting her own fear? A full deep dive into Katniss and motherhood could be its own video. And then there are the nightmares, the coping mechanisms, the fact that post-war Katniss is basically living in a half-abandoned district, hunting alone, playing real-life avoidance games with every reminder of the rebellion. We're going to cover her PTSD symptoms in detail at some point, the hypervigilance, the emotional numbing, the way she fixates on small routines because big questions are unbearable. If you put her on a therapist's couch, what's the actual diagnosis? Survival guilt? Complex trauma? Or is she simply a very damaged victor doing the bare minimum to stay alive? That's one possible future episode. Another is asking whether Katniss would ever make a good leader on purpose, not as a symbol the capital and coin fight over, but as an actual decision maker. Suzanne Collins has said she isn't naturally political. She's focused on her district, her small circle, her own sense of what's right in front of her. So would President Everdeen be a disaster, or the only honest option in a world that's sick of grand promises? We also need a full comparison between book Katniss and movie Katniss in terms of perceived selfishness. The films strip out her internal monologue, which means you don't hear the constant threat calculations, the self-blame, the reasons behind her colder choices. A single facial expression can make her look cruel where the book shows terror. Added scenes of her running toward danger make her seem braver. Omissions of her more petty thoughts make her cleaner. That part matters because adaptation choices quietly edit her morality for millions of viewers. And then, pattern interrupt. Imagine a speculative Katniss in therapy roleplay episode, or a mock clinical case study of the girl on fire, where we walk through her file as if she's a real patient from District 12 referred by the capital. Would you want that more than the PTSD breakdown? Or the leadership video? Or the book vs movie selfishness comparison? Tell me which angle you want next in the comments or the poll. Because this isn't a final verdict on Katniss. It's an ongoing conversation about what the games really did to her, and what that says about us. Closing the file on Katniss for now. So let's close the file on Katniss for now. We started with that moment at the reaping. Prim's name. The silence. Katniss pushing through the crowd and screaming, "I volunteer." At face value, it plays as pure, shining selflessness. The perfect hero origin. But after spending all this time in her head, does that still feel like the whole story to you? Here's the real question. If she hadn't stepped forward, could she have lived with herself? Or would the guilt have hunted her the way the mutts hunt tributes in the arena? There is a lot to uncover here, but one thing is clear. She isn't a saint calmly choosing martyrdom. She's a traumatized teenager whose brain has been wired by District 12 poverty, her father's death, and years of being the family's only safety net. In that moment, volunteering is the only move that lets her keep breathing. That part matters because it reframes almost everything we call selfish about her later. The berries, the way she pushes Peter away and then clings to him, the way she tries to run from the role of Mockingjay and then explodes on snow in front of the entire capital. From the outside, those choices can look erratic, self-serving, even cruel. From the inside, they're survival calculations in a rigged game where every option is bad. When she protects Prim, or risks herself for Rue, we're going to cover genuine altruism. But even there, The motive isn't broad ideology, it's her tiny circle of attachment. Suzanne Collins has said Katniss is not naturally political. She's not waking up thinking about revolution manifestos. She's thinking, keep Prim alive, keep the people she loves out of the arena, keep the nightmares barely manageable. The rebellion grows around that narrow focus and uses it. So when you ask, was Katniss selfish? You're really asking a systems question. What does it mean to be generous in a world designed to kill you for hesitating? Clinically, trauma tightens your focus down to immediate threat. Hypervigilance, avoidance, bargaining with fate. Those can read as selfish from the outside, especially if you only see the highlight reel, the capital edits together. This is where we talk about generosity of interpretation, with fictional characters and with real people. Instead of stopping at, why did she do that? You start asking, what system trained her to see this as the only move? District 12 trained Katniss to hoard food, to distrust promises, to assume the games never really end. Victor's village, the forced romance with Peter, those just weaponize patterns she already learned to survive. So if you want more long-form, psychologically grounded Hunger Games breakdowns, more attachment styles in District 12, more therapy file episodes, more books vs movie Katniss debates, make sure you're subscribed, hit the rating buttons, and share this with that one friend who still has Mockingjay-era feelings. Because in the end, Katniss isn't proof that heroes are selfless. She's proof that sometimes surviving is the bravest thing you can do. And from the outside, survival doesn't always look heroic or generous until you know what the arena really looked like from where she was standing.